I ain't got time to hold nobody's hand through this thing. Like I'm here I'm here as an example to show people it can be done, right? God can change your life. God can free you from alcoholism and drug addiction and the lust and sex and pornography. Like, bro, I was so consumed with me self. I want to do what makes Frank feel good. What makes Frank feel good? Money, women, drugs, alcohol, fights, bar fights. And I passed a lot of that. Like I passed, I've almost, how did I say that? I learned a lot of that from my father.
I was actually about to ask you, what I've noticed, a lot of people that end up in prison or a lot of people that are arrested, almost every one of them had some type of issue, and it usually stemmed down from the father.
Yeah, so I know my grandpa was on the same yard that I was in Fort Supply. My dad never went to prison. Got in trouble with the cops a lot, but never went to prison. So I kind of learned everything that I picked up. Like once my dad left, I was hanging around a bunch of I was like 12 when I first got in trouble. I got a pistol charge when I was 12 years old. And then I met the dudes that I was running with. They were in high school and they were like 16, 17,
How old
18.
were you when your dad left?
Like 8 or 9, somewhere around there. And like he was always in and out, but then then one day he never came back, right? Yeah. And then as I got older, I remember my mom telling me, for the few years that my dad was in Texas, my mom would call my dad every time I got in trouble, right? If I was talking back, I was skipping school or whatever, she'd call my dad. My dad was like, boy, if you don't straighten up, I'm gonna come up there and I was like, yo, it seems like the only time I can talk to my dad is when I'm raised in hell. Yeah. Until eventually it just didn't work. Then I was like, yeah, he ain't coming back. And then I started running with all the homies. And then I got into the smoking weed, drinking, smoking cigarettes. I was 12 years old and I steal packs of cigarettes from my homies' parents and stuff. And then it went to weed and then alcohol. And then eventually moved into women and drugs and all this other, and it was like, I didn't have a great role model or whatever. I don't know how you want to play it, but that makes a big difference in my life today now because I have 3 kids. I have my boys, and they seen me go through a lot of stuff, especially my oldest, my 13-year-old. He's seen me go through, he watched me and his mother, I should say, go through a whole bunch of drinking, partying. We moved apartment to house to apartment to grandma's house to aunt's house to another apartment. And a lot of it was because I wouldn't drink. I wouldn't hold a job consistently. Right? All I always wanted to do was party. I was like 18 when I met his mom, so he's my stepson. So I was 18 when I met his mom, and...
How old was he?
He was still in diapers. He was, I think, about a year old, almost 2. And he was, he was a little baby. It was this girl that I met at a party. It was her son. And we kicked it for a little while. We moved fast. In a month or 2, she was moving into my apartment. And I was 18. I had my own apartment. Right? And so I had the freedom. Ain't nobody gonna tell me that. So I'm gonna move this girl in. But it's crazy because I met my baby mama. And then the next day, I didn't see her. But then the day after that, I was with her from that day every day for 7 years.
Wow.
And that was us, and then she had a kid. And then eventually he got to calling me dad. And, I wanted to be that father figure for this kid, and then a few years down the line, we have a kid. And then a few more years down the line, we have another kid, and then that we lost all of our children when my youngest, he was 6 months old, right? So when I got out of prison, my youngest seen me and he didn't even know who I was, right? Same thing when he seen his mom for the first time. He didn't know who she was. So he was so young that we lost him at that point. And that was because we were drinking, we partied well together. We'd sober up, we'd like each other for a little bit, but you can only like somebody that you meet on the party scene for so long sober. And then it's like, we party great together. We don't do a whole lot of other things good together, but we can damn sure throw down together, and it really, being a father never really was that that big of a thing on my list. Like, and I don't want to admit it. I'm going to. Having kids as an alcoholic and a drug user, they are just in the way of me drinking and using. And that's how it was. And it was like that for a long time. I was never home. I was always running off with some other chick, or, baby mom was running off with this guy. Like, we weren't never faithful to each other. We never had a peace. There was a year where we went like 7 months and we had a peaceful home where it was a house. It was a home. It was me, her, and our 3 boys. And then I started selling drugs because I just couldn't take the calmness, the peace, I guess. I started selling drugs. And before you know it, family full of chaos again. So it was like, I don't know, fatherhood. It's it's a son of a.
Yeah, it's that a lot of people assume that police officers typically grew up in a great household and everything else. They wanted to, because they were never around that. That was not the way of me at all. Sorry, let me fix this. I didn't actually know my dad. I have an older sister. My father actually left when I was born, and I'd only seen him a couple of times as a child, like once, twice. One day when I was 3 years old, and the next time when my mother got her rights taken away. My mother, you'd said that kids get in the way. And this, to be completely honest, I don't ever talk about this, so it's not an easy subject, but it's very true. My mother actually abandoned me, my brother and sister, when I was 8 years old at a neighbor's house in Texas. She left us to get back with her ex-boyfriend that was abusive, but they drank together in Oklahoma. So it left us in Texas to go to Oklahoma. And but the only father figures I'd ever had were her boyfriends or her first or second husband, which he ended up in prison. He ended up, he wasn't a very good guy. He ended up kidnapping a woman, taking her across 3 state lines, and then coming back to Oklahoma. And my grandpa actually caught him. He wrecked in our yard out in the country. And then he actually ended up holding it at gunpoint until the officer came there. And that'd been the last time I saw him. And so from that point, I didn't have a father figure. My grandpa, he worked all the time, and I was there for a couple of years, but then they got rid of us and put us with our aunt and uncle. And my uncle was a great guy, just not a dad. I'd never had conversations. I actually don't remember a single conversation I'd ever had with a male as a kid, a real conversation, except being told what to do. And so I never got to see that. But what it put inside me, which was the opposite of my brother and sister. My brother ended up in drugs and in prison. My sister ended up in drugs and then a Jehovah's Witness. I still don't know which was worse, but still, just kidding. But then there was me. I never got into drugs. I smoked a little weed and stuff, but I never did that. But I just looked at it and saw all that I was missing, and you can't, we said this the other day, you can't make somebody quit doing drugs or drinking. You just can't. And I held it inside for so long that I could make my mother quit drinking, but I didn't. I didn't see my mom again until I was 18 years old, 17 years old. And she borrowed my car, like just a couple of days after I met her again. She borrowed my car and got drunk. And I didn't see her again until I was 31. And I got a relationship with her, and she quit drinking because she had 3 strokes. She couldn't do anything. And then she ended up dying, a year later and stuff. But I finally met my father when I was 20, but he had quit drinking, but his apathy. See, a lot of people don't understand, and they have so much trouble being a father because they think they're supposed to do this or do that. We all screw up. I mean, honestly, I screw up all the time. But it's being there. It's letting them know that you're there. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be right, but you're there because you love them. You know, and that'll affect you throughout your whole life, you know. And I think, you know, out of everything, my stepdad being abusive, my mom's boyfriends, the apathy, the not being there, you know, that's literally the most important part of fatherhood. I have 2 kids. My son's not my biological. I came around when he was about 3.5 years old. He started calling me dad. Didn't know his biological father until he was 6 and stuff. And we have a good relationship and everything. He's a good guy. But I don't ever want him to feel like somebody doesn't want him there. Because that's how you end up doing stuff like getting into drugs. Because you're going to try to fill that void. You know, and I found a lot of people that I'd arrested, you know, didn't have fathers, or they had a bad relationship with their father. They didn't feel like they were cared for, you know, and they're filling a void.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, there was I think a lot of times today, man, what keeps me going is like I stopped looking for excuses. You know, I remember when I first got sober, when I first got out of prison, and I had my 2 boys, right? My oldest one was still in Hawaii. I had my 2 boys, and I had them, and baby mama wasn't in the picture at this point, right? She was still in California. So like when I went to prison, she went to California, right? And you know, I'm not trying to say this to like damn her or anything like that, because that's like she found her way of escape. I went to prison, and then my kids kind of just got tossed up in the air. So one of them went to Hawaii, which was my oldest boy. And then the other 2 went to my mom's house. And that's just where they were until I got out of prison, and then I moved into a sober living house. And then I started getting my boys on a more, you know, weekend basis and everything. And then, you know, I was getting them from my mom, and they were coming over. And I got that first taste of being a dad, right? Because like, although I had kids, I was never, like I said, I was never a father. I was always drinking. I was always getting messed up, man. And they were just kind of in the way. I never took the time to get to know my children because I was always drunk. And I remember when I first got out of prison, my oldest son, my middle son, Elijah, he would, every time I would drop them off somewhere, he would grab me. He would grab me and he would scream and he would cry, and that boy wouldn't let me go because he didn't know if I let dad go, when am I gonna see him again? You know, because they have known me to leave. I would fight with baby mama, and the first thing I'd do is I'd grab the keys and I would take off. I'd storm out the door, you know, and watch my son, and my oldest son would just watch me leave all the time. I watched my dad do the same thing to my mom, right? I was young. I don't remember a lot of them vividly, but I do remember nights where my dad would either come home or he would storm off, you know, and of course it was after a fight and everybody had been drinking, and you know, like he would take off and then he'd just be gone for a little while, you know, and then he'd come back. And I remember I would do that. I would grab my dad because I didn't want him to leave, you know, or there was nights that I would go to sleep and he was there, and I'd wake up and then he'd be gone, right? And that shit sucked, man. And I like, after getting sober and realizing this is what I've put my children through, a lot of it, I wish I could say I've been doing it, like I stayed on that path, but then I relapsed, right? I talked about this, I think last week or the week before. I talked about when I relapsed, right? Coming out of prison, I got sober, had my kids, and then I lost them for a second time. Nothing is worse than losing your kids twice, right? Because the second time, especially after saying you're a Christian, right? Yeah. After God saves you and all this, you run off and you trick this off again. And I lost my kids twice. And the thing is that I knew better. And I numbed myself from the pain. I numbed it. Every time I thought about my children, I'd stick a needle in my arm, right? Because I would rather get high and not think about it than have to face what I've done. I never thought about it. And then January of 2020, man, I ended up in jail, right? And there was a yoga instructor. Her name was Chris. She said I could use her name. Her name's Chris Wyatt, right? She lives in Bristol. I love this lady, right? She was my angel because while I'm in this jail, I was supposed to get out on a Friday. They mixed up my court paperwork. So I go to court Friday, but I was never on that docket. I was on the felony docket, which was another day. So I ended up getting stuck and they laid me over 2 weeks. So, and I was in there on fines and costs. So of course I'm like, I'm gonna see a judge. He's gonna rulate me. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna set up my payment plan. I'm gonna get back out to the streets. And I had some people to kill. And that's just being completely honest. Like some shit happened before I went to jail. I was gonna go burn someone's shit to the ground. But God had other plans because I was supposed to get out on a Friday. They had me on the wrong docket. I get put off for 2 weeks. So that same Friday, I go back to jail. And for some reason, and this is the weirdest thing in the world, is that they had a yoga class in jail. I cannot make this up. This lady, her name is Chris. She came into Creek County Jail, right? And just like how they would bring AA or 12 steps or the church would come and preach, she brought a yoga class. And they were like, who wants
sorry,
to?
I'm still just,
Dude,
I'm trying to picture that. 11 years I was in law enforcement. I've never heard of that before.
I promise you. And so I was so mad and I was gonna beat the shit out of my cellie. And it wasn't his fault. I was supposed to get out that day and I didn't. So I was like, I'm just gonna go to get out of my cell. So I go and they take us in this little, like it's a day room kind of thing, of course, behind the locked door. And we're sitting on this mat and there's this older lady. And she's just like, gray hair, old one, glasses. And I'm just kind of what you would expect like a peaceful yoga instructor to be. And I'm just like, what? I don't even know what's going on here, man. And as we start going through this lady was the realest motherfucker I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
She gave me some truth, and not just truth that I wanted, like truth I needed to hear, truth that I didn't want to hear, but I needed it. Right? I was talking about my kids. She asked what I was going to do when I got out, and I was like, I'm going to go see my kids, right? And at this point, I'm like fighting. I'm getting choked up. And I started kind of tearing up. And she looked at me, and she first of all, she told me, she's like, you're not a piece of shit, And she was like, but then she told me, she was like, the way you feel right now, because I was thinking about my kids, bro, and I was starting to cry. She was like, the way you feel right now is probably the way those babies feel every day without you. And then it hits me. I was like, damn, bro, the feeling that I've been running from, my kids have had to live with. And if it wasn't for that lady, I wouldn't have went to rehab, right? And we have a relationship today. She checks up on me. She checks up on my boys. But she's the one who kind of kicked me in the ass with some truth. And I was like, dude, I need to figure this thing out, man. I need to figure out how to be a fucking dad to my kids because I don't, and then I've used that excuse my whole life. I've never had a dad, so I don't know how to be a dad. Going in and out of the 12-step rooms that I go into, man, doing my AA and NA meetings, it took a matter of perspective, right? I'm looking at these older guys that I've gotten to know and I've gotten to grow real close to them. And some of them are old enough to have grandkids. I remember one day I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna father my kids, And then I'm looking around this room in the men's meeting and I'm like, there's like 20 dads in here and all of them love me, Yeah. For me to say I don't have a father figure in my life, it's because I'm closing my eyes and I'm not trying to find it. Yeah. And that's when I started looking at other people like, you know what, dude, I love this guy. Can you help me figure this out, or how did that, and like, dude, that's how my parenting has been coming. Like, making decisions that I want to pass on to my children and being humble enough to ask some guy, not just some guy, but, someone that I'm close with in my recovery groups and stuff to say, hey, look, dude, I'm struggling in this as a father. Can you help me? Yeah. And to be vulnerable with people, bro. That's everything I've been trying to figure out this far, like that's as far as that I've gotten. And it's like you said, bro, it's hard, man.